And you are live.
Great, thank you. So we'll call this meeting of the task force to order. In attendance, we have all task force members except for Mr. Gibson, who is on a work travel, but may be able to join us a little bit later, as well as Eileen Leahy, who is our partner here from the Board of Elections here in the city. And so just to sort of recap tonight, obviously we're going to hear from Mr. Garris from the county and Board of Elections to talk a little bit about that relationship, hopefully whatever sort of questions and the information that was shared out today, just to sort of think through sort of how it has worked and what what we might want to recommend. And then I think hopefully after we have that conversation, we can sort of get into a little bit more sort of thinking about some of the different sort of action items we've started to kick around just to have sort of conversation. But so with that said, welcome and thank you for taking the time to spend a few minutes with us. And I'd love to sort of, from my perspective, sort of hear a little bit of how you've looked at this relationship with the city and administering the elections here since you've been involved in doing that, and sort of where, sort of how we should sort of frame our thinking and sort of coming to try to understand how we got here and what, what might be the best sort of road forward.
Thank you. I appreciate the time to speak to you, and thank you for inviting me. My name is David Garris. I'm the director of the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections. I've been the director since October 2021. Prior to that, I was the deputy director since 2008. The development of the variances between the city code and the county code. So I think starting with about the 2017 city election, the mayoral election, that's the first time that we rolled out the new paper-based voting system. Well, it's not new anymore, but we rolled out the paper-based voting system after having used DREs for 10 years. What we found is when we created the MOU is there were a lot of differences between what the city's code, city code and charter said you needed to perform for the election. And it was very, very specific. And one of the problems is that it's so specific, but it hasn't been updated. And I don't think it's been updated for a very, very long time. So we performed the 2017 election kind of using the procedures that we have used for the state. But one of the things that we did at that point is to create we had our MOU, and we created a letter kind of documenting all the variances between the city code and the county or the state election law. Because one of the things that was going to come up is that when we had the contests, the way that we conducted the election was not going to confer, it wasn't going to match the way the law was written at all. So we did the 2017 election.
Just if I can stop you, can you expand on that a little bit? Yeah,
absolutely. Well, not
where the discrepancies were between what.
So we did 2017 and then we did 2021 or 2021. That was the right one. And when we did that, when we did the MOU, we had as one of the exhibits, Exhibit C, which I shared earlier today. And that was, I think that's a really good artifact from the 21 election because it it's pretty explicit, and I think it's pretty comprehensive as far as listing, differences between the city's procedures and what we do. There's things in here like the use of sheets, like actual paper sheets, whereas we're digital these days. Certain dates and things like that, they don't line up anymore. So there's a couple ways that we can solve this. There's two major ways that we think that would be fairly simple solutions. It really depends on the will of the city, whether or not you want to implement them. But one thing that you could do is to align the city's elections with the state elections. Baltimore City used to have a mayoral election in the off years, kind of like the same pattern that Annapolis currently has. Then a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, they aligned the mayor's term to the presidential elections. And that's helped them because it helps, one, it reduces the amount of duplicate effort, because we're going to have that election in Annapolis for the presidential anyway. So it will have polling places, election judges, the whole 9 yards. And you kind of piggyback on the budget that the county is already spending for it. So the city doesn't actually have to, maintain another $100,000 to hold that off year election. And one of the things that's really become apparent while we've been doing this is those off year elections, they don't get very much turnout. For whatever reason, you usually get about like a 15% turnout for the primary and then like a 40% turnout for the general. So that's a lot of effort, and it's a lot of funding and a lot of, things that everyone's doing, where if we already have the process built for for presidential or gubernatorial, why not just combine them? And then you'll have everything that you would have for a regular election. And you actually have more, because for a gubernatorial or presidential election where we're working with the state, you can email ballots. That functionality exists. The online lookup tool exists. And those are things that the state doesn't do for municipal elections, because it's the return on the investment, I don't think, is there. It's a pretty expensive function to do for a small municipal, whereas they will do that for the state election. So if you did align it, you will pick up some functionality that you don't currently have. So that is a plus. The other solution is, if it didn't want to go that route, is to just simply take the counties or the city's code and put in a catch-all and say the city shall use the Maryland election laws to conduct the future mayoral elections, something along those lines. So either of those solutions, in our opinion, would be the simplest, easiest way to fix this problem. But that's been our experiences, and I'm happy to answer any questions or provide any other backup feedback. Yes.
Great, thank you. Eileen?
Eileen, you're muted.
Sorry about that. If you could just talk a little bit about some of the specifics in terms of the differences. I know a couple of things that we've gone back and forth about is the primary date, the municipal election particularly as it relates to mail-in or absentee voting.
Couple things with mail-in voting. So as I mentioned, with the state elections, you do have the ability to email the ballots. That's something that the cities doesn't really have. We also have all those online resources that that the state will run for their elections that they don't run for the municipal elections. I kind of mentioned the online voter lookup. So what that means is that if you are just a resident of Annapolis, you can type in your address, name and address in the portal, and it brings up where your polling place is, and it gives you a sample view of your ballot, so you can see the names of sorry about that. So you can see the names of the candidates who you're eligible to vote for. So those are two things. Regarding the voting itself, when we use the state function, we can use the state vendor to mail the ballots. So I think you probably see some cost savings there in terms of your mail costs, because the state mails at nonprofit bulk rate. It mails it at a nonprofit bulk rate, which probably the city doesn't qualify for because you don't have enough mail. Let's see.
I was thinking also about the primary date, because in the last election, when we did mail-in ballots, we couldn't go with an absentee ballot system because there wasn't enough turnaround for the applications to go in,
That's
come
right.
back.
I think, in the last election, was it a September, November?
This is September primary, and then
So the state can't do it that way anymore. We have a piece of federal legislation called the UOCAVA Act, which basically says that ballots to military and overseas voters must be mailed 45 days prior to election day. So that means basically because of the tight window between September and November primaries, you can't fit. There is not a 45-day window. So the state had to push the primary, and in this case to May in 2024. So there is a bigger window, but because of that window, you actually have, you can make the argument that you're providing a better service to your military and overseas voters because they do have more time to get their ballots back.
I got you. So we have a couple questions stacked up here.
Sure.
Andrew first, and then JM.
Thanks, David, for coming to speak to us. Could you talk a little bit about the limitations of aligning with the state? Like, in what ways would that limit us? So, for instance,
Well,
the Board of Supervisors of Elections shared a document with us recently, which brought up the possibility of using like ranked choice voting and other methods like that. What can the state do? What can the state not do in that regard?
well, so that is a good point. If you do align with the state, then you're making a pretty solid commitment that you're always going to use the state's equipment and the state's procedures. So if you did want to try something like ranked choice voting and the state doesn't, then, we wouldn't really be able to help you. So that is something if flexibility is something that is valuable to you, then that's something that you may want to consider. It would be a drawback if you move to the state, because until the state, until this House of Delegates passes a law that says ranked choice voting is how Maryland is going to do it, we're going to continue to do it how it's currently written. Another point that I've heard mentioned is that if you move to the state's ballots, the mayoral candidates are going to be at the bottom of the ballots because of the way that it sorts. So, if you look at Baltimore City's ballots right now, it's the president, all those, and then it gets down to the mayoral after the presidential stuff. So if that was something that would be consideration, then that would also be, ballot position will be, you'll go from being the lone occupant of your ballot to being fairly down ballot now. Okay.
JM.
Okay. I guess what I was going to say is just a comment. Like, if we move to the state, the city wouldn't be responsible for finding locations for polling places or hiring judges.
That
would be okay.
Because you'd be piggybacking off of the project that we're already doing.
All right, and
Right
there aren't
now-
any combined precincts in Anne Arundel that would make that difficult, like having a city
No.
ballot in a precinct that doesn't only have city ballots.
No, because the way that the precinct lines are written, if you have a precinct, it can't be in the county and the city at the same time.
Okay.
Have what we call a split, and we basically, what we would do is, if we went in that direction, is we'd take all those splits, so all those little pieces where like the county and the city share a precinct, and we'd shear off all those county people and stick them all on the county side, and all the precincts for the city would be specifically city people from that point forward. That's how we'd fix
Okay.
that.
Yeah, that's what we do in Carroll too. My other question is, if we commit to going with the state, would it be possible to run our own primaries and then go on to the state just for the general?
No,
Okay.
because our office wouldn't be able to maintain 2 calendars.
Okay.
Plus with all the logistically, it'd be extremely difficult. Okay.
Great. Some other questions, other comments or thoughts? I guess something that occurs to me is sort of the cost of this. How can you talk through a little bit of sort of how from the county's perspective, since 17, what it's costed you to go into this, what the city's cost is, sort of in that window?
I think that typically the county's view is that the citizens of the city are paying for the voting system and the voting warehouse and the Board of Elections kind of anyway, because it's a county agency and they're they are county taxpayers. So the last couple county executives have been of the opinion that we'll just do it kind of gratis. However, if it was, if we did do itemized cost estimates, and they're usually around $75,000 to $100,000 for an election. So I'd imagine you could probably say you're going to save about 150 to 200,000 just off the operating costs. No matter what your build, because I don't think the cities really build anything.
Thank you. So JM, you still have another question? Are you got, okay. Eileen?
I was just going to mention, just for general knowledge, that in the past 2 elections that we've worked with the county, the city does pay for the election judges. So that's our biggest expense. We pay for the election judges, ballots, mailing. So there is cost that the city has been.
Yeah.
And
But if you switch, then the election judges they'll switch over to our payroll.
Right. Could you also comment? I know that there's been talk at the county level in terms of moving towards voting centers. And so I think that would be something that would really affect the city in terms of how the elections were run. We're used, in the past, we've been used to having 2 polling places in each ward, and then we moved to 1, which worked well. But what is the state looking at for the future? Because that would impact maybe decisions.
That was something that was discussed. The legislature was actually very clear. They do not support vote centers. So Maryland is not going to have vote centers.
Okay.
We'll be using precincts for at least the next probably 5 to 10 years. But being serious, there was some discussion about vote centers, but I don't think that there's going to be any movement towards vote centers for at least another 4 years. So.
Mhm.
I think for the foreseeable future, it's going to be precincts.
Thank you.
That's another thing to add for if you switched, you'd gain early voting, because right now you don't have any early voting. So
Thank you.
you'd actually
Andrew?
gain another 8 election days.
You made a point in your comments that the city code related to election laws is like very specific. Do you think that, I guess it would just be interesting to get your sense, like, do you think that the code should be like much more general? And I want to make sure I'm interpreting your comments right. So I get the sense you think the code should be much more general, much more aligned with potentially with the state law, rather than being kind of unique to Annapolis. So does that mean that you would suggest that the Board of Supervisors of Elections has like more, I guess, degrees of freedom here to regulate various aspects of the election, because it wouldn't be in the state code? So the Board of Supervisors of Elections should be empowered to a certain degree to make determination.
That sounds like I'd need a JD to answer that question. A doctorate of jurisprudence. No, I do think that the code should be more general, because the way it's written now is it's very specific. So if you're not continuously updating it year to year, you kind of get stuck with what we have now, which is where we have references to things for like file cards and things like that might have made sense 30 years ago, but they don't make any sense anymore. So that's why I think the code should be more general. As far as whether or not it would empower the board more, I mean, it would depend on how you wrote that particular law. So I don't think I could answer that question right now.
Yeah, I think, it's probably something that we as a task force need to talk about, because like you said, like technology is changing so fast. Like we talked about in our last task force meeting about like social media and the challenges that presents. But now we have like artificial intelligence, which is becoming increasingly popular, and that presents a whole new set of challenges, which I feel like would be really hard to write into the code. So So yeah, I think it's really something more for us to try to figure out. But thank you for that.
Sure.
JM?
Yeah, Annapolis's own Dana Jones recently, I think, passed a bill increasing the amount of that we would have to pay election judges. Would that also be passed on to the city? Like, would the city have to pay the election judges that increased amount?
Previously, the city I think you guys have paid more than the county, actually. So if you kept that pattern up, you're gonna pay slightly more because we've upped our pay rate used to be 175 for most of the judges. Now it actually has to be 250. So, probably, I'd assume that if the same election judges are working in the city that worked in the county, if you tried to pay them less, they'd probably push back.
Yeah.
Lee, want to jump in on that?
Oh, I was just going to answer. I think, Regina, I think we paid the upgrade already. So I think we proactively went with what was going to be proposed. Because again, we needed the election judges in the competition. So I think we're already at that higher level.
Okay. But if you move to the cities and if you move to the state's schedule, then no, I don't think we wouldn't rebill the election judges back to you. We would just eat the cost of the election judges as a regular operating expense for the Board of Elections. Because the way we would look at it is that in a regular presidential election, you have the polling places in Annapolis anyway. They're going to be there. They have to be there. So,
Other questions, comments? Anyone want to jump in, please?
Just a short question. So you mentioned that like the mayoral race would be at the bottom of the ballot. Is it in some places? I just remember like historically voting, my experience was that I would get like 2 ballots. Is that an option here, or would everything be on one single ballot if we were to tie in with the county?
When you get 2 pages, it might depend on the length of the ballot, the number of people running, the number of questions. Every year after a census, we have the county has their code review, their charter review commission, which proposes like 10 or more, questions at a time, which makes the ballot length excessively long. There are times probably when it would be 2 pages, on a case-by-case basis. Yeah.
So I guess what I was thinking was like, would it be possible to have, if the city were to go with the county, would it be possible to, I guess, specify that they would be on separate ballots to like clearly delineate them, and then allow, I guess, kind of give more attention, if you will, to the city than it would be if like the mayor's race is all the way at the bottom?
That's an idea. I don't think anyone's ever proposed that before. So let me check. That might be a solution.
Great. Other questions, thoughts? Anyone want to jump in? I mean, it seems it seems clear to me, sort of like the 2 scenarios you laid out. One would be sort of like, obviously going on cycle with the federal election, the statewide election, whether the gubernatorial or the presidential. And then the other recommendation you were sort of making was basically just sort of wholesale taking out everything in our code and just putting the state law in there.
Essentially,
and then we would
reference to
basically,
refer back
under
to
that
the
scenario, we would be running our own elections again as a city, but because we would have the exact language of the state, it would be cleaner. Is that sort of your point of
So
view?
if you go with proposal 2, what I'm saying is that you'd essentially remove all of your language and say something to the effect of refer back to the state law. So that means that whatever the state election system is and whatever the state process is, that would be the process that you would use for the election. So right now that we use the DS200 scanning units and the ballot marking devices in that system. So we would use that for 25 and probably 29. And then when the state switches their voting system In 33, you would switch to whatever the new system is. And you'd use that for 33 and 37 and so on.
So you'd follow along, you'd be able to stay on
Yeah.
if you stay on your separate schedule, but follow along everything else as if it was a state election, basically, right?
Absolutely.
I see
And
what you mean.
the part that would make it easier is that if we're all following the legislature's guidelines, basically, then there's really only one source for policy. And it just makes it the likelihood of something getting missed or, lost in the shuffle or, something like that. It's much reduced.
Thank you for clarifying that. Eileen?
I know you mentioned about the ranked choice voting. If the city wanted to have the county conduct its elections, how might it work or could it work if the city decided to have an open primary? Meaning that all voters could vote for the candidate. So it wouldn't be a ranked choice or a nonpartisan, but all registered voters could vote for the candidates listed. Or they could at least
If I'm
opt for Democrat.
remembering the election law correctly, I believe the party itself has to request that the primary be open. So if the request doesn't initiate from the party, like the
Mhm.
Democratic Party could say, we want to have an open primary and let anyone vote. And we would accommodate them, or the Republicans could do vice versa. But we couldn't go and say, we're going to have, we couldn't, as Anne Arundel say, we're just going to do an open primary for everybody. That decision has to come from the party itself, I think, according to the election law article.
Okay, so we need to check that. But if it was requested, is that something that the county could still run?
If the state itself was running it as well. So if the state was running it, then the county would run it, or the county would run it for the city. If the city was just doing it, but the state wasn't also doing it, then no, probably not.
Okay.
Now, I don't want to say universal no. I'm just kind of saying that in all likelihood, that would be the answer. Because what I would have to do is take that request back to my board, and then my board, they would review it. And I imagine they're probably not going to be keen on doing that, because that means kind of creating an entire set of election regulations and policies for the city.
Mhm.
So they would probably push back on that, but it would be their decision. So it might be that they would just say, yes, we want to do that, in which case we would happily do that. So
Andrew?
Just kind of a adjunct to Eileen's question. So let's say it's not an open primary where, of course, you would need the permission of the parties. Another option that was proposed in the Board of Supervisors of Elections document was a nonpartisan blanket primary, right? Where it wouldn't involve the parties at all, and candidates would just be listed and say like their party registration, but they're not technically representing a party. Is that something that kind of is the same answer as what you just had with the open primaries? Or
that's the same answer, because basically that's ranked choice voting.
Well, not,
right?
I mean, not quite. If we're talking just primaries, right? So it would just be, a pick two primary or pick.
And then the
Top
two
four.
highest move forward.
Right. But you're not ranking candidates or anything like that in
Right.
that sense, right?
Yeah, people could still have a Democrat, still have a party or a political affiliation. It's just that you're allowing all the voters. I think in some states, the voters are given the choice of taking a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot. In some, they may just list all of them, and so they can pick whichever candidate they want. So there's no restrictions. It's not like it's ranked choice or that it's any of the nonpartisan. It's really allowing all voters to vote in the primary is basically what it's doing.
The process for ranked choice voting hasn't been established in Maryland yet, so I couldn't say how we would do it if we did it.
Right, but I'm not talking about ranked choice. I'm just talking about an
Or
open primary.
whichever, yeah.
And it sounds like, right, like if we come to 25 and we're doing it exactly as we've done since 17 with the county as the partner, you're going to basically say anything that would be recommended by the council to do differently than how a state election runs, right, is going to be viewed as not favorable or not able to do, right? So like.
Not
it
favorable,
seems
not
like,
necessarily not able to do. I don't want,
Yeah.
like I say, I don't want to say blanket no, because we try
No,
and work with people and we try and, we try
I
and
get that.
find a
I
solution,
get that.
but I
There
would
are
say-
nonpartisan races though, like Orphans Court.
Hmm.
That have multiple people, not just two choices
yeah.
or a
and
board of ed.
They'll appear on the Republican
On a
and
primary ballot.
in both ballot styles, Republicans and
Right.
Democratic ballots. So it can be done, but it's not being done quite exactly how you're saying. But there are ways that it's done, like you are right, because the judicial elections, they are nonpartisan elections which appear on the partisan ballots. And I know that sounds weird, and it's a weird way that Maryland wrote its election law, but that's how they decided to do it. But yeah, you're right. That
But
can,
then there's also a nonpartisan ballot as well, right?
Hmm?
There's an unaffiliated ballot.
yeah, for the school board candidates, true.
Yeah.
So there are options. There's ways to do it.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I mean, if we had our mayoral ballot as an unaffiliated election, it would appear on the unaffiliated ballot as well, and that would basically make it open, right?
That's a speculative thing. Don't want to say yes or no. right
Okay. Sorry.
I would be happy to take that to a lawyer and then talk it out with them, but
No, yeah. I mean, I think for us, like, like just trying to get a feel where sort of the fault lines are before we
Yeah.
get pretty far down the road of making recommendations. So I think that's helpful. Andrew, I saw you had your hand up, but you want to hop in?
Sure. What ultimately, who makes the call with like these decisions with us, whether or not we work together? Is that the county board of elections? Is it the county executive?
so,
Who's the authority there?
so ultimately the MOU is signed by the county board of elections, which is the 5-member board that's appointed by the governor. They approve the MOU or the agreement. They'll do a motion and they'll say, yes, we agree. And then I'll sign it on behalf of the board of elections. And then we will, we'll conduct the election. That said, the county board has said no. In 2015, they said no. So that was a whole other kettle of fish. That was its own thing. So, but it can happen, but it usually shouldn't.
For those of us who I guess don't have background on that, could you talk maybe in general terms about why they might say no to something? Like what might be?
Oh,
I don't want you to have to touch a third rail here, but if there's anything that you could help
no, I'm
us.
just, it's been 8 years. That's a lifetime in elections. The last 3 years have been a lifetime. Oh my, I really don't.
And I think, what was it in
Yeah.
2015? Was it a special election?
No, it was the regular election. I don't recall. It might have been because we were transitioning for the DREs to the new system. That might have been what it was. Do you recall?
We didn't have an election in 15. We had one in 13.
13. That might have been the one that we
It
didn't
might have
do.
been 13, yeah.
And they did say no in 13.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that might have been when we were switching between the DREs and the paper system that we use now.
Great. Thank you. And anyone else, any other questions or comments? And
that said, I think that the county administration and our office, we kind of look at it like the county citizens, including the citizens of Annapolis, have paid for this system. They're all taxpayers, so as much as possible, we should try and use the resources that we have so that everybody in the county benefits for them.
If I can just ask, are there other municipalities in Anne Arundel County?
Just one. There's a city of Annapolis, and then there's Highland Beach, which is this tiny little, it's a tiny little eight road municipality right on the corner of the water.
And do they run their own elections? Or is
They
that?
do, but all they do is they get the list of the voters from us. And then because there's only 8 roads, they literally use a piece of paper and they have people come into the hall there and they just,
Paper in a box.
exactly, it literally is. But it works for them because I think there's only 64 people or so in that municipality. It's really, really small. There's 64
Absolutely.
families, something like that.
Eileen,
David,
I had another question. One of the things that has come up with the current Board of Elections in the city is the of expanding the electorate. And I'm wondering, David, if you could comment on some of the municipalities that have lowered the age of voting to 16 or 17, and also municipalities such as Tacoma Park that allow residents, including non-citizens, to vote. And I'm just wondering what the perspective is at the county or state level.
Choice of the municipality. I mean, we don't really have a dog in the fight, so to speak. Some of those are political questions, and we leave that to you guys. If you guys decide that's what you want to do as far as the registration, that's kind of your determination, and then we'll work from there.
But since the county takes care of the voter registration or monitors it, is that something that
What they do there, I think, is that they created in the MD Voters module itself, they created a separate Substack, I think, for the folks that are registered that way. I would have to do more research into how they actually accomplish it.
So the state is still taking care of the voter registration for Tacoma Park as an example, but just keeping two different sets.
Let me verify that.
Okay, that'd be great.
Regina, did you have something you wanted to jump in on?
Thank you. I was going to ask David. David, so you said the governor appoints the board. So is he in the process of doing that now? Or
actually, our new board has been appointed, so they're all confirmed. The current board's last meeting is May, and then the new board will start in June. So.
And when do they meet?
Second Thursday of every month at 9 a.m. So.
Thank you.
Their first meeting will be June 8th. But that's really going to be when they convene themselves. If you wanted to speak before the board to talk about the next election, I'd really recommend doing it at their July meeting, which would be probably around July 13th. Because that June meeting, like I say, is going to be the first time that the 5 new folks have been together. So they have to convene themselves, elect a president, and kind of get themselves situated.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Eileen?
Just one final thing. I did want to just mention that, and I think I speak for at least the past board and for Regina, that working with the county has worked out really well. They've been very responsive to our questions. I think that we've worked well. We've done follow-up meetings. We've tried to streamline things. So even though there are some differences, we really haven't had, at least from my perspective, any problems. And I really applaud them for their professionalism and their controls that they have, and really appreciate not just David, but all of the staff at the county level.
Yeah, we've got a really great team here. So thank you. No, we try to work with everybody. So we're doing a public service and we're trying to work for the citizens. So, we try to make it all come together.
Great. Well, thank you, David, for taking the time to chat with us. And, you may hear from us again as we get into this work, but it was very helpful to hear from you at the beginning of this process. So thank you.
Sure. You're welcome.
Thank
All
you.
right. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Great. So I think I did by email the other day, but sort of as housekeeping issues, and then we can get into sort of talk about whatever anyone wants to talk about on the record, including sort of action thoughts about sort of next steps, which I think would probably be helpful. We're planning to invite at the next meeting, which I believe is the 10th of May, the city attorney, Ashley Leonard, who does all the election stuff in the Office of Law. And I think, she would probably be able to give us a little bit of a sense of things from that perspective, right? And sort of how things have worked out. She was there back before 2017. So sort of seeing it from internal city, working closely with Regina and the board. So I think that would be interesting, maybe as a sort of counterpoint to this conversation. And then we're starting to try to figure out if we can do at the second meeting in May, do that sort of public hearing. And I think they're going to try and figure out with Regina and her team sort of what the format is for that and how we do that. But that's sort of where we're headed, I think, in the next two meetings, if that's agreeable to everybody.
I think that's going to be around the week of the, let's see, your meeting. You're meeting on the second and the fourth Wednesdays, right?
That's been the framework, but I think we've,
Okay. So your meeting will be on May the 24th, your public hearing. So gotta tell me how you want to proceed with that. Is it going to be, we might need Mark to probably jump on here, because if you're going to have a virtual meeting, he's going to have to tell us what we need to do to have people join.
I just want to make a notation that May 24th is commissioning week. Just
It's true.
So that means
something to think about.
Blue Angels Day, yeah.
It is. It's actually Blue Angels Day. Yeah.
Well, they'll be finished early.
Yeah.
We can meet at 6.
So
Yeah.
Mark, like how should we, obviously we want to get as much participation as we can. Like how should we think about how we would do that and do it in this format?
Right. So the standard procedure is you make a public announcement announcing your public participation meeting, indicate that it will be virtual, and that anyone that wishes to participate must register by sending an email with their name, phone number, and email to, I believe it's livetestimony@annapolis.gov, and then set a deadline for that. We would prefer that to be at least 24 hours before the meeting, but you can set whatever deadline you need to. Then what I will do is those emails are sent to me. I would then respond to them and say, thank you for registering. Here is the link to the meeting. Please do not share the link. Here are the instructions for how to participate in a virtual meeting. You will not be admitted if your name is different than the information you provided. Of course, when they do sign in and it's different, I'll attempt to verify their identity. But then I'll have a list of the people that have registered. I'll send that out to your task force and to Regina. So you'll know how many people we're expecting. And then that's it. And then if one other little tidbit you might put in the announcement is saying that if you do not receive a reply, you won't be able to participate. Of course, they won't have a link. So, but we also want to make it clear that if people simply want to watch, they can do so by going to the Boards and Commissions YouTube page and watch the live stream and or a recording afterwards. So it's really only those people that wish to give testimony.
Okay.
Thank you. And then I guess the question is, what latitude do we have, obviously, to share that out with community groups or other groups or folks who, I think it'd be smart to figure out how we share that invitation. But I'd look to you, Regina, to tell us.
I'm gonna tell Mitchell, and she has a lot of streams to send information out. So we'll involve her, and she'll take care of it for us.
Perfect. That's great. Yes, Andrew.
One thought might be, and there might be reasons not to do this that I'm not thinking of, but one thought might be to just have a public comment section in all of our meetings. So we were sort of similar to like a city council meeting or something to that effect, just to give more opportunities for input. So just an idea. That would be thought number one. Thought number two is maybe in addition to public hearing, just because it's kind of a involved process to identify, understand the technology, and then register and join, would be to have some sort of very simple like written feedback form that individuals could submit comments. And perhaps working with the communications team to do that might be worthwhile.
I think that would be something that would be easy to do. We do that now for city council.
Right. And we
If
do
written
have-
comments show up, so we could talk to Mitchell about that also.
I think there is a comment form already on the task force website.
I thought they were working on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's there. I don't know, Regina, I had mentioned to you that there's actually 2 spots on the website. One says Board of Elections Task Force and one says Task Force on Elections. If we could maybe consolidate those or pick one.
They started working on it last week, so I'm not sure if they're done.
Okay. But we were able to, like for the application process, I think you could put something in, I think getting general feedback, or if there's specific questions that the task force wants to ask, that might be helpful.
But my view is that we should prompt it with like a specific question, just like something simple or basic, like how would you like to improve elections in Annapolis City, or something to that effect, just because it might be a little intimidating if it's just a blank form.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the key is just going to be like getting it out there to people, getting the link in front of them to so they can see it and be aware of it.
Good point. Mark?
Yeah, so what most of the other boards and commissions do is they do have a public comments form. The difference between that and the city council is that those public comments for the city council are posted on the city's website, so everyone can read those public comments. For the boards and commissions, those public comments, I'm not sure how they're posted, but they are sent automatically to all of the commission or task force members. So you all would be able to see what the public is saying. For it to be posted, that would be an extra step that I would have to do. And because I currently do that for the city council. And those forms, some of those forms also have a box that can be checked that say, I wish to give public testimony. I wouldn't recommend going that route if you're going to have specific public hearing sessions, because that would imply that people could request public testimony for any one of your meetings, and that might get a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that, like, in thinking about these really good comments here, right? Like that if we're going to have the, something coming out of the city's Office of Communications basically saying, the last time you heard about this task force, it was being formed and now it's up and running and now there's a chance to come in and talk, that those sort of things that ask for input in writing, ask for other sort of input, we can figure out what the form is. But like I'm fine if someone says I want to testify or about something at a later date, we can figure out sort of how to do that. But I think you probably get that the first opportunity to get the most attention and hopefully get the folks in the communications office the most to put something together that we can then sort of push out in the community and get the most excitement around. So I think like we try and do as much as we can in that first push, right? And hopefully we get people who will come on the 24th, and we get written comment, we get other people who want to engage in the future, and I think it's all good from my perspective. But unless anyone sees it differently, but cool. So we will, please, Andrew.
Well, would it be worth having the communications team like come to our next meeting, maybe for like 10-15 minutes, and we would like talk through how we're planning to get the word out, how we're planning to get this form out, that sort of thing? Is that something that we might be interested in?
Mark is the communications team. The only one missing is Mitchell.
Okay. All right.
Cool. Yeah. And I mean, I think we could basically, once that's going to be noticed of that public, as Regina was saying, sort of you walk, and Mark was saying, you walk back a certain amount of days from it, and then that'll be sort of, and I mean, we're certainly, I think, it seems to be the consensus of us, like, the more of a press release they're going to do, the more sort of thing to try to get attention for it is what we want, right? So the more eyeballs on that this is an opportunity, I think. So, and I think once they have that as an official release, assuming that's where the way she does it, then like, other people in the community and other sort of folks can share that out, right? And it'll get a wider thing. So I'm, I'm just in thinking through what Regina's saying. I mean, I think we can probably just sort of follow up through Regina and make sure that they sort of have that sentiment of what everyone would like here, and hopefully it'll be, you know, we'll have ample time to be able to make sure it gets out in the community.
Great. Regina, if you wouldn't mind, could you maybe send us the link to the form just so we can see it? Thanks.
Great. So Eileen, I know you sent out over the weekend some, you know, sort of some feedback from the board, and sort of as you're thinking about sort of what your priorities are going into the next cycle. I think it's probably similar to what you had shared before, but I guess I'm curious sort of the deliberations with you and your colleagues, you know, in addition to sort of the session recap pieces about you know what moved over the 90 days. Are there things in those recommendations that you want to particularly draw people's attention to as we start to think about it?
Well, actually, we got that afterwards, so we didn't have a chance to really discuss it at our last meeting. It came up because we had done it in the past. So to be honest with you, haven't discussed it at the board level, but could certainly talk about it at the next one. I can't think of anything specific. Can you think of anything, Regina, that I don't think there was anything. Again, it's just kind of streamlining as far as also because there was so much change in the past elections with moving towards absentee and mail-in ballots. So I think just look at that.
Okay, Regina?
I would like to say one thing.
Please.
I honestly feel like if we just struck some of the language in Title IV and put in Maryland State article on elections, be so much easier. But that's only my opinion. So
We'll see what Ashley has to do, because in 2014, when Arnold Smith and Cliff Myers and myself first looked at this, we made that recommendation after like our third meeting. You know, especially because we were coming off of the 2013 election, which had a lot of challenges to it. And at the time, the city attorney said, absolutely not. And so we were really swayed. Now that was 8 years ago, more than 8 years ago. So we'll see.
And 8 city attorneys ago, maybe. Faye?
Well, did you say that Eileen sent something out to us since the last meeting?
I sent something out, I think Friday night, but I had trouble sending it. So
I didn't get anything.
We'll make sure it gets.
Yeah. Did Andrew and Jam, did you all get it?
I received it. It was those updated recommended.
It was the
policy
priorities from the Thursday night meeting and then some links.
No,
Yeah,
I didn't get
Yeah, I
it.
got it.
Okay, I'll double check, Faye, and send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
If I didn't have your name on it, I apologize, but I thought I got everybody.
That's no problem. I mean, technology is great when it works.
Check your spam file, or it was a big file, and that's why I had trouble sending it.
Okay, so maybe, yeah, I'll check spam, but I didn't get anything. And the other question is, in addition to what the board's priorities are, remember the last meeting we talked about each of us sending you. So I guess at some point we'll get that to you, and then we'll discuss those at a future meeting. Soon, I guess, sooner rather than later, so that we'll know. Once we get all this background information from the next people that are going to speak to us, and then we can move forward.
Yeah, and I mean, I was realistic in sort of thinking about the timeline as, you know, as we got into this conversation this time, and we get into the next conversation that like that'll probably generate ideas too. So I'm not in any great rush for that. I have an email from Scott with some issues, but yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, like the way we do this, right, is sort of as everyone hashes that out, whether it's you know, it's formalized where we sort of go around and say these are the things we want to make sure we get to, or it just sort of comes up in the course of the debate. You know, I think you know, it just has to be sort of on the record and doing this instead of doing it right on the side. So Andrew.
I'd second Faye's point. I do think at some point it would be worth having like a discussion where we consolidate the board's priorities, our priorities, and then what we get input from the public. And I say that because I think having like a really clear sense of those priorities will focus us much more when we get to the point where we're thinking about, okay, these are the recommended changes that we think we should make. And yeah, my sense is the more we do that early on and understand those priorities, the more systematically we'll be able to consider what the best recommendations are. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
I totally agree. And I would just say, like, I know, right, like we were sort of by email, right, like an effort to start to distill that down, I think is, I mean, that's probably the meeting after the public testimony meeting, right, is spent largely doing that, right, and sort of getting to all those things on the table and everyone sort of having their opinions heard. But Eileen?
That sounds great. That sounds great.
I think it will be really, I think it'll be great to have these public hearings and to do some more outreach, because one of the things that the charter revision found was that things such as nonpartisan elections and cycling in with the presidential or the state election gets a lot of talk from a small number of people and kind of the same number of people, which doesn't disqualify what their thoughts are, but this will, it would be good to have an opportunity to get a larger sample. And that's why the Charter Revision Commission said, put it on a ballot question. If the city council isn't going to make the decision or whatever, let's find out what the voters want. And so instead of waiting until 2025, this might give us a feel for, get the pulse of what voters are interested in. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. No, I think that's right. Like, I mean, I think we said at the first meeting, and it still remains true, right? Like all the great work that's going into this, all the people we're going to talk to, all we're going to hear from, right? Like, we, at the end of the day, it is a series of recommendations to other people that hopefully they will figure out how to act on, right? And so, like, how all those different strategies about how to get the recommendations, have the strongest ability to hopefully get enacted, I think is probably what we all should be right excited about it for investing this amount of time into this. So, but that's sort of like, the second half of the game, in some ways. Great. So so it sounds like we have kind of a working framework for the next couple meetings, and we have some follow up that we'll do as we get closer to the public hearing being noticed, and how we can figure out how to share that out to the widest possible extent, which is exciting. And then really sort of pinning that meeting after that to really get into our sort of first thoughts of recommendations and changes that we'd want to make sure we get on the table to talk about. What else? What else does anyone else have? I feel like we're
I think
making good
approval
time.
of the minutes.
Yes, we'll do that. Yes. Regina?
One more thing, the city council, at their city council meeting on Monday night, they tabled that postpone indefinitely CA 222, which was the charter amendment to enlarge the board from 3 to 5. So that bill is basically gone.
And that was done at the request of the Board of Elections, primarily because they wanted to defer to the task force, and also it didn't have a mechanism for implementation.
Good. That's good. Seems like good news. Great. And we have the minutes of the last meeting. Do we have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes from our previous meeting.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Great. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Excellent. Well, that was fast tonight. Yeah, I mean, I obviously we don't have anything else planned. If there's anything anyone wants to talk about or sort of get into, I think it seems like we have sort of the next steps lined up, but I'd be happy to entertain a little time if anyone wants to.
Just a question about the minutes for this meeting. Do I send them to you, Ian, or who do those go to?
To Regina when you have them
Gotcha.
together. Thank you for doing that, by the way. That's great. Yeah, so you get just sort of email into Regina and she'll get them in the right format so we can approve them at the next meeting.
Did we get a breakdown of costs associated with the past few Annapolis elections? Like just like a itemized like receipt?
Was that in?
Nobody, I didn't receive it.
I'm wondering if it was buried in there.
It wasn't. I mean, I can put something together for you.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that just to see, what costs what and how much it is.
'Cause I'm pretty sure we have a document, don't we, Eileen?
Well, we have a number of different things because what happens, a lot of the things kind of trickle in after the election. So,
Karen
yes,
still has a budget of the previous election dollars.
right. It's always what we've tried to figure, not just what the city has spent, but also what the cost to the county would have been if we had been
Mhm.
having to,
And it'll be weird because of the whole COVID thing and the automatically sent letters and et cetera, et
right.
cetera.
Right. Well, we saved money on the number of election judges because we didn't need as many, but we certainly had much higher mailing costs.
Yeah, that's the kind of numbers I'd like to see, just to see like pros and cons of, what if we
Yeah.
decide to
Regina,
go.
you and I could probably put something together. I think there is something together. I just have to find it.
It is. We've, since it is budget season, we had to kind of pull that information together because the code requires that we have money in our budget for a special election. So we had to pull everything together. So I'm pretty sure if I send an email to Karen Steele, she could get that for you pretty fast.
And one
I
of the
would
things
appreciate
one of the things in the last election that was really critical and appreciate getting the support from Mike Lyles was that we had money in there to have an election associate start a year before, I think September of 2020, and then was there for 18 months, Regina?
Yeah, we're looking to have the person start in January of 2024.
Right, and that really was critical to have an election associate that could really follow up on everything. And so hopefully it's good to hear that's in the budget.
Mhm.
But you'll see a jump because of that between the two, between 2017 and 2021.
And just out of curiosity, do those numbers that you've put together budget, I mean, do they go back to like 13 or previous when the city was doing it, the election solely, like as a comparison? Or has it really just been comparing 17 to 21 kind of to 25?
I don't really have an answer to that, but I will pull all the information together and make sure you get a very detailed list of what was going on with the information we can't find.
Right. I think it'll be a little apples to oranges.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. But I rather feel like, in some ways that is presented as not apples to oranges, right? But like, I think
Right, right. So,
see
yeah.
those numbers.
So for example, one of the big cost savings we get with the county is we don't have to rent voting machines.
Right. Okay.
Great. Well, if no one has anything else, we could entertain a motion to adjourn.
Nobody wants to go home or turn on.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Moved and seconded, motion to adjourn. All in favor?